Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo and Patrick Daley joining us for episode 135, Why the Office Moved to the Cloud and Took Your Server with It. It's punchy. That's a good one, Patrick. I like that. Did you write that? You probably wrote that.
No, whoever did, though, they deserve a raise.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, let's get rolling. Before that, we have some really cool news. Argo Translation was just honored with being named to the Inc. 2025 Best Workplaces in America list, and it's a huge honor. There's only 514 U.S. companies that are named to that list. I think there's only about 30 or so in Illinois. So super honored. That's a credit to our people, to the management team, to the leadership team, I should say, and to the employees. It's a cool place to work. So thank you very much, Inc., for that honor. Very excited about that. And why don't we get rolling, Patrick? So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, before we get into that, I did want to say too, I think it's super important to, like, everyone understands that you have your company brand, and I think that's more towards your prospects, but I think it's also important to recognize how important your employer brand is, of like how it is as you are the employer, like how it is to work there. And I think these types of awards are a big testament to a positive employer brand. Like, I think companies all too often focus on one or the other, where it's only internal, your employee brand, or only your external, your kind of client facing brand. But really having a good marriage between those two is super important.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, in many ways, I think this is a bigger honor than the Inc. 5000 from last year. Because that's a testament to our growth and the sales process and execution and the work we do, where this one is, really speaks more to the quality of the work environment. It's like a testament to everybody, right? Because we all know how this is. We've all been there, especially in a smaller organization. One or two bad apples really can kill the culture. So it's just a testament that the whole group is fun to work with and very supportive and collaborative, and it's exciting. So yeah, what are we talking about today, Patrick? Roll it out. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think we're talking largely about just kind of your tech stack setup, kind of independent of any translation systems that you're running, but those are definitely included. I think this is kind of one level higher than that. And I think this was definitely accelerated during the pandemic years, where a lot of stuff kind of had to go remote. So we're talking about kind of how some things that used to require either a physical machine or physical location have now moved to clouds or data centers or whatever it might be. Kind of modernizing the tech stack is kind of what I take away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea here was, right, again, with the spirit of our podcast is Translation Confidential, giving people sort of a peek behind the curtain. So the reason I thought this was an interesting topic is, as you know, we're looking to acquire some competitors, and thus we get to meet a lot of cool agency owners. And I'm always interested in people's setups. We always cover IT a little bit and talk a little bit about how folks' systems are set up. And I'm just shocked that some are paying a fair amount of money in IT support, but yet their infrastructures, there's some weak points. So I thought we could serve two things here. I think there's a bunch of things that people could get out of this. Potentially, if you're a translation buyer, understanding the makeup of translation companies and how they work. If you're an agency owner, maybe picking up a point or two or a kernel or two, say, hey, this is some stuff to look at. So obviously the shift to cloud is the big thing. You brought up the pandemic, which I think was a huge shock to not just our business, but many service-based businesses, right? So many, we're very proud of the fact. I have friends of mine that run service business say, we don't allow remote work. We're all 100% in the office. Server infrastructure, you can't access a damn thing if you're outside of the office. And, that became a liability real fast. But I think for us, there was a couple things. We were already remote, not fully remote, but we were like 2/3 2/3 remote, a third in the office, I think, essentially like that. But then with the pandemic, we started hiring people abroad, and you have some like really interesting business problems. Like, I've got project managers in Argentina. Nobody will ship a computer to Argentina. How do we deal with that? So you get all those issues like, what is your policy? Is it a bring your own device policy? So what we do is we ship out like very light desktop computers, usually laptops. We're all laptops now. So, they're not super, super robust laptops, because the reason is our team logs in via a virtual device interface. So it's a VDI that's in an Azure environment. And the reason we do it is because it's easier offboarding and onboarding. Of course, we had to find some folks that resell computers in Central America and Latin America, all like these things that we needed to do. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we landed there. Patrick, you've been on the other side of the equation. I mean, you've seen rapid change, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to your point about acquisition, whether you're on the acquiring side or on the selling side, I think kind of doing your due diligence on all those little things that you may not think about, of something as simple of, oh, we run Google Workspace versus the company we're looking to acquire runs Microsoft. We got to figure out how those play nice together, how we roll the other company off of that system and onto our systems. So I think having a really strong base to start from is really important. And like you said, but another kind of acquisition point, if you're looking to acquire a company, is okay, where are your employees? Like, how does IT affect them, and how does IT work with them if they are in different countries, like you said? So I think like having something in place that you already have the answers to those questions really, really sets you up for success.
So, it's interesting because, this, like, it's funny how the same situation could be like a liability for people, right? In other words, we talked about that my colleague that said, "Oh, everything's in house," so they saw remote as a liability, and obviously the flip side exists as well. But I think the really important thing, to dovetail on what you were saying, Patrick, is that everybody has to do what's right for their environment. However, the bar keeps moving up, that depending on your infrastructure, it may become a liability, right? So even if you think, yes, we have a server, at this point, I think servers are starting to become a bit of a liability because of the hardware cost, right? So we just met a company that, hey, we just bought a brand new server. It was, $20,000 worth of software and hardware and implementation. It was a big investment. And, the funny thing is right after you buy those, they depreciate rather quickly. You have to have the software, and someone has to patch it and all those things, right?
It's like buying a car. As soon as you drive it off the
Yeah,
lot, it goes down by 30%.
100%. And, I think, yes, cloud services can be expensive, but, you have levels of redundancy. Gosh, I can tell you, early in the pandemic, before we were on VDIs, right, Patrick, I'm sure I did it for you at some point. It's like, oh, my machine at the office is off. Can you go turn it on? Thankfully, I live close. I go turn the machine on so you can log in. That was more, we were doing remote access to desktops here in the office attached to a server here. It's not great. It's not scalable.
Now there's nothing on the desks, right? People
No.
bring their computer with them when they go home.
Yeah, it's really, really funny. We have a server room with no servers, and I think there might be one computer in the building. It's mine because I come here every day. Otherwise, everybody brings their
Now
machine
it's a
with them.
storage room.
Yeah, well, exactly. We just have network equipment in there. It still generates a fair amount of heat, so it's still temperature controlled and such, but it's really, really a different environment. But what's really, really nice about this system is we talked about rapid onboarding, offboarding, really nice. Also super scalable, right? If we start to run out of space, we get a note from we get a note from our MSP that says, hey, we need to expand the Azure directory because you're running out of space. Okay, great. Flip a switch, we expand it. It's far easier.
Right, and the alternative in the past would be to buy a new server, right, and do all of that patchwork and all of that updating. So now it's a bit simpler and easier and faster, like you said, to just be like, okay, boop, done.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I think from a scalability background, you really just can't beat it. So we talked a little bit about, like, we just want to make sure we cover all the benefits, really. We talked about anywhere access, centralized updates, and lower IT maintenance. It's the updates, right? So that's actually really nice too. From a security perspective, far easier for the MSP to patch everything, make sure everybody's on the same system. I know we have far more control over software licenses, right? That's always a huge expense for companies, is software licensing. I, gosh, this is like going.
Like the old CD book of them that you used to have?
Yes, I was going there right now. Oh my goodness. So, we used to have a whole storage room full of software, and it was like, oh, well, this is Patrick's machine, and it would be all his CDs and discs for like his device. And, it was so weird to throw all that away because, of course, now none of it is, there are no discs. It's all downloads and the license
Yeah, your
restrictions.
25-digit code and you're good.
Oh my God, I could not type those codes. It was terrible. It's amazing just how things have changed in really a short period of time. But, again, some things to think about as well as like the security and compliance aspects and, where the data lives, right? We respond to RFPs, we answer security questionnaires for clients, and it's so much simpler now, right? Because essentially our security requirements are those that are generated by Microsoft Azure and our MSP. And it's super, super simple. So it's just much more robust, really.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of set it and forget it from your perspective in terms of management. Like you just need to work with the service provider to do what you need to do, and they kind of execute everything rather than it being you doing any of the work. It's kind of like, hey, this team is able to take that off my plate for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us to the part of the conversation. I think we've covered security pretty well. Obviously we didn't get down into the details. If you really want to understand, you want to get into, all the bullet points that your IT folks would want to discuss with you. That's maybe not for this discussion. That's for, maybe 10:30, you can't sleep at night. You start to go over those bullet points. But instead we're trying to talk about the broader business sense. So I think translation workflows, right? That makes sense for our audience. And just the change in TMSs, right, Patrick? I think, you're a young guy, but even from when you started, holy cow, it's changed, right?
Yeah, I know I've talked about before how the first agency I worked at was we would get Trados packages and ship them to translators, take them back into Trados, ship the editor a package. There was a lot of kind of manual back and forth, also being done through a translation management system, but lots of people in the mix. And now I think kind of the standard is to have a cloud-based application. I think one that helps the linguists a lot because typically people were buying like a Trados license or a fill in the blank with whatever cat tool you're talking about license. And that, like we said, is kind of was like the CD. And it's like, this is your one shot at like owning the software and that's it. And now I think that comes through a lot of the providers where the providers provide access to their cloud environment, their cloud translation management system. So that reduces the cost on the linguist side. But also then all the work happens in real time. It doesn't require you to ship a package to your project manager who then ships that package to their editor. It all just kind of flows and flows a lot easier and faster. And even I think certain translation management systems have either a chat or a comment function where the translator and editor can talk directly to each other without having to go through the project manager. So that removing that bottleneck is a huge improvement on efficiency and collaboration on the linguist side.
Absolutely. It's been such a huge, huge shift because, when we were transferring files, I mean, the project manager was technically could be a big bottleneck, right? Just passing those files back and forth. And now what's nice is you have this monster sized project, 20 languages, 40 linguists attached to it if it's the typical TEP workflow, and everything flows because the minute the translator hits the last segment, the editor's pinged and says, hey, it's your turn, let's go.
But and the PM gets an email that says translator's done. It's with the editor now, so they don't have to go hounding down the translator and be like, "Hey, you're 5 minutes past your deadline." It's like, no, you've already actually passed that along, and I can see that in the system.
Yeah, I love any of those tools that sort of, I kind of talk to them like air traffic control, right? Where the project manager is more of an air traffic controller and making sure that everybody is hitting their marks. Because, what do those things do, right? It allows you to focus on the things that are more important, like building good glossaries, doing proper QA on tags and all the assorted things that have to happen in support of a good project, answering all the questions that are coming in from the linguists and distributing them the way that they should be distributed. Because all of that, for me, administrative work is the enemy, right? It's like those things don't add value. Like none of that adds value, like creating POs and herding cats in terms of deadlines. None of that adds value. And if the system can take care of those things, that's huge. So
I think another thing that we didn't even really touch on is like integrating your translation management system with other systems. I'm specifically thinking whether it's a website CMS or even an internal accounting tool. Like I remember having to pull files out of Trados, pasting it into Plunet to spit out word counts and multiply by rates and do all this kind of ridiculous things where if you can just kind of say, okay, accounting system, look at our cloud-based translation management system, pull this project and their word counts, you've got a quote in seconds when things that would take minutes to hours before. So just like how all those systems can play together because they live in the cloud is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, one of the other things that I wanted to add about it, we've done different shows on connectors and getting content and going to scrape it where it lives. Like all these systems really play well into that scenario where, a client has a website or they have a SharePoint repository or whatever it might be. Because these systems are connected or can be connected, it allows for much better throughput, much faster delivery, right? Much faster kickoff times, much faster delivery. It's really a huge thing. We've run across a few agencies that are still running very much in the old school way where they're passing around, files from Trados Studio, and it's not the way to do it.
I call that the super glue and duct tape setup.
Yes, correct.
It might work, but if you put a little more pressure on that system, it's probably going to break.
Well, and quite frankly, from a business perspective, one of the most important topics we talk about, Patrick, we were chatting a little bit before our call about resource management, right? Is how much can your project manager manage, right? And if they're stuck doing all of that administrative work, well, it just drops the amount that they can manage. They just don't have the time. So from a business sense, if you can implement these tools and these systems and these workflows, all you're doing is allowing your project manager to do more.
Right, and that brings up a good point too. Of if you are able to increase the output of your project managers, if I'm just going to make up numbers here because I don't know all the nitty gritty, but if the system you're running, let's say, it was cost that 20,000 you're talking about, and moving to the cloud will cost 25,000. Okay, yes, you're down $5,000 in that transaction, but how much more can your PM manage now? Because if it's more than 5,000, it's probably worth it to do that move. I know obviously change management is difficult and painful for a lot of people, and rightfully so. But I think having that long term lens of, okay, maybe we have to spend that 5,000 now, but our PM can do 50,000 more over the course of a year. So like that's well worth it.
Absolutely. And we're going to do this in a 2-part episode. So the episode number 2, we're going to dive a little bit deeper on sort of the implications for translators and employees, and it'll be fun to dive down a little bit deeper. So like, what are some of the challenges and the considerations? Like, obviously, someone who wants to naysay this is going to say, oh my gosh, but if it's in the cloud, the security, say, well, what if the internet goes down? Well, you still can't email your file if the internet goes down, right? So, but I think makes sense for us to maybe go through some of these things and talk about them. Absolutely, there's pros and cons to each approach. I just think at this point, the pros and the cons really tip the scale to a more distributed office, right? To one that's more in the cloud. Certainly, you have to do all the things you need to do to properly secure the environment. You have to. I mean, that makes sense. But I mean, I don't know, anything resonate to you or any of those issues?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously we talked about cost can be a concern too, but I think setting yourself up to support the incoming workforce is going to be super important. I think those that are coming into the workforce now are kind of, for lack of a better term, like the COVID generation coming in of like they expect things to be remote or hybrid. Like I know a lot of older workers, is, oh, I had to come in 5 days a week and why blah, blah and all that kind of stuff, which like that's just the situation at the time. But I think ignoring that is a big miss. I think you have to kind of meet the workforce where they're at. And if you are able to offer either a hybrid or remote workplace, then you're just going to be that much more attractive to talent entering the workforce or looking to make a switch within the workforce. So not only from, throughput and output strategy, but also from like a workplace attraction policy, I think it's a big plus as well.
I agree, Patrick. One of the things that I often hear, because remember, I'm older, so the people I hang out with tend to be a little bit older. So they love to, they love to chat about the old days and wasn't it fun? Listen, absolutely. I think if you're not careful, collaboration can take a hit. The coffee clutching, right? The chit chat stuff's actually really productive, right? To be able to chat with a colleague about their kids and baseball games and the like, that's all part of the bonding and rapport that you get with your colleagues. Yes, those are all things, if we're talking specifically about the remote aspects of work and life. However, the things that I just can't agree with are when people say, well, you know what? None of my employees would work. If we were fully remote, I think they wouldn't do anything. Well, okay. If you think that
There's bigger issues at play then.
yeah, exactly. That's my point. Because if that's your concern, well, I guess what? When they came to your office, I guarantee you, if that's the case, those employees were also surfing the internet for 3 hours at your place. So the fact that people cannot do their work in person, like in other words, they can avoid accountability remotely. Well, guess what? They were probably doing it in person as well. So I think the bigger issue is, right, the company, how many times have we said this, Patrick, over the years? The company with the most adults wins, right? It's like you hire people because you trust them and you know they're going to do good work. And absolutely, you're going to hold people accountable for performance and levels of work. And you're going to have KPIs in place that measure, hey, are they doing their thing? And you're going to review their work with them, or their managers are going to review their work with them. Trust is a two-way street, right? Your employees trust you and you trust them. And those that can't operate in that system will self-select. They eventually will either self-select or you will select them out, is my theory.
Yeah, we'll see. It's interesting to look at the more macro situation right now too, of some of the bigger companies out there of pulling people back into the office, and lots of people thinking that's like a veiled attempt at layoffs, basically, like you said, as people are like,
Absolutely.
I don't want to go back, so I'm just going to quit, or quiet quit, or whatever it is. And I think these big companies know that, and I think it's a little bit. I hope people see through that of like, okay, this is kind of the same thing, but in a different way, where they're kind of throwing their hands up and be like, well, this is our policy now. So like, you can quit if you want, but we won't fire you.
You know what's funny about that is, I think, here's my theory on it. I don't know, I can't prove it, but my theory on that is that I always think companies have to have the highest levels of integrity and candor with their employees. And yes, I think some companies overhired in the last economic phase, and now they're trying to figure out how to right size their workforce. And they're like, oh, we can get two things done here. We can make ourselves feel better about the leasing requirements we have and the space that we have by getting people back in the office. So I always say you have to come back in the office. And guess what? 10% of the people will probably quit. Well, here's the problem that I think. You might be losing the 10% of your best employees, because certainly you can have an argument to say, well, the best ones will make their way back in. Yes, true. But hiding in that group of employees that you potentially might lose are some people that have only worked for you in a remote fashion. And since then, some people will minimize this, but they have pets, they have children, they have aging parents, that this new reality of a remote workforce, it works for them, because at lunch they can sneak away and see their mom or their dad that's in a facility or at home and requires assistance, or a child that needs to be picked up at the end of the day. And I still believe that in my heart that really good employees, we actually get the better of it. Because those very conscientious employees are like, well, I took an hour for lunch, say whatever, if I have to work a little bit later. I actually think they might work more hours.
Well, that's the thing too. I think like counting your commute and your workday is a super interesting exercise. If it takes you an hour each way, okay, you've got a 40-hour work week. Now that's 50 with your commute. So that's 10 more hours that you're on or away from home or whatever it might be. So I think it's important to take that into consideration, where as if you say, okay, we're, hybrid policy, you have to go on twice a week. They might be a little bit more amenable to be like, okay, it's only, 4 extra hours a week as opposed to 10, like not that big of a deal.
And that's a really good point, Patrick, because I have a sneaking suspicion that people do see that. And I say, well, my work week's more like a 50. Because, they're thinking about time with their family, time to their hobbies, whatever it might be. They're thinking of their own free time. So they think of that as like a 50-hour commitment. Whereas if they don't necessarily have to commute, it's like, that's more like 45. I think you're going to get a couple extra hours of work, and, giving people a little bit of flexibility. I think they end up working a little bit more. And not that we're counting minutes, but my whole point is just a productivity measure, right? Just as long as everybody's doing what they need to do, that's important, and everybody's being held accountable. So, I just think everybody has to think of this as it's not if. I mean, that ship's already sailed. It's more of like, how are we gonna address this? Because I think I don't know what cataclysmic event that would be, but I think it would only be a cataclysmic event that would get employees back into an office 100%. I don't see it. I think friends of mine that are at companies that have, gone 100% in-house already, it's sort of window dressing, because he's like, yeah, the reality of it is nobody's here Mondays and Fridays. And, maybe it's just Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's like, well, you're really not 100%. And I'm just not like a big fan of that. It's like, call it what it is, right? So then you aren't 100%. You're more of a 2/3 kind of thing, or whatever, 3/5 or whatever fraction you want to use. I would rather call it that than we're 3/5 in the office. Pick your 3 days, right?
Yeah.
So the future. All right. Obviously, AI plays into this. I think we made it almost through that whole show.
I was going to say, that's what,
Damn
25
it.
minutes, 28?
I think I ruined it. Let's just pretend that bullet's not there in our show notes. Really, it's the serverless architecture it's going to continue, right? I mean, it really just makes more sense. And of course, specific to our world, cloud-based machine translation engines and portals, and just all the TMS systems. For those little fragments that aren't already in the cloud, they're going to be in the cloud. I don't think there's a way around that.
Yeah, and I think I'm unfortunately going to go back to AI, but I've seen a lot of use cases recently where people are like, oh, it took me a half hour to make a website that I could take payments on. Just like things like that, where you can get two systems to talk to each other. You've got your website and a payment processor working together, and it only takes you 30 minutes to stand that up. Like that's pretty astounding in this day and age, how fast that can happen. So I think AI can be super helpful of like, okay, I've got these two things. How do I make them play nice together, basically? And you can kind of get there relatively quickly now, and with a pretty solid quality there as well. Like, you won't run into bugs and things like that. But even if you do, just ask AI to debug it for you.
AI controlling AI. It's the Matrix. It's coming. Patrick, this is that point in the show where we look at our closing thoughts. What's your biggest takeaway from today?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit hard to predict the future, but the companies that are more proactive and future looking are going to be set up for success in 5, 10, 20 years than those with the duct tape and super glue ones of just trying to tread water as opposed to swim forwards, I think. So really thinking of like, okay, yes, it is the present and the future, but I think by no means is it going to, in 5, 10 years, this future will look different. So just keeping in touch with like just macro trends and things, and how the infrastructure is all changing is going to be super important, because the system you build today may not be the system you need in 5, 10 years.
Yeah, I like that, Patrick. Yeah, for me, it's, my biggest takeaway is really just that the world's changed, that ship has sailed, and that unfortunately, I think any of the professional services providers, whether it's translation or otherwise, that haven't gotten on this bandwagon, it probably is time to exit, because it's just going to be really, really hard for you to move forward. I think you'll continue to see a reduction in earnings. You'll continue to see a reduction in who you can hire, who you can potentially bring on. So I think it makes sense. And listen, hey, this stuff doesn't have to be hard. If you don't know what the first steps are, find yourself a good, reasonable MSP, an IT support company that works with small businesses, and ask them to lay a roadmap out for you. It's like, hey, the server is good for another 2 years. All right. I mean, fine, get the 2 years out of it, but slowly transition to the cloud. Make a plan. Say, all right, but then we're going to go to Azure once this is done. And you're working on Trados locally. Well, figure out a way to what the path is to get into the cloud. I mean, the path is there. It just
I
has to.
think you bring up a good point too, going back to the acquisition thread of, say you as a buyer are evaluating two potential acquisitions, all other things equal, and you see that one has physical servers and one's in the cloud already. What you're thinking as the buyer is, okay, how much easier is it for me to integrate this company if they're on a server versus in the cloud already? So if A is on server and B is in the cloud, you're going to go, okay, we're going with B because that's going to make my life easier in the future. So just again, not everything's going to be tied to acquisition, but if that is the route you're going, just thinking through like how you can make it easy to be integrated into the company that's acquiring you.
Absolutely, Patrick. Absolutely. And that is exactly what would go through my mind. So, well, thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you everyone for tuning in for this episode of Translation Confidential. This is Peter and Patrick signing off.